Welcome to Coahoma Community College's Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ouida McAfee, and today we have joining us Dr. Christina Joseph Muhammad. Welcome, Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. McAfee. So happy to be here.
And we're happy for you to be here. We've got some good stuff to talk about today. So let's get started with you telling us about yourself.
Okay, so Christina Muhammad. I serve here at Morehouse School of Medicine as director in the Office of Operational Excellence and Belonging, as we're calling it. And I've been here for 6 years, been in higher education over 20 years. Started, as most people do, as a work-study student at my alma mater, Spelman College. And I've had the privilege and benefit of working at many different types of academic institutions. I'm originally from New York, so I had some experience at a small commuter college in Lower Manhattan, very close to Ground Zero. Moved on to a large public institution, the City University of New York, and left New York after 5 years with an Ivy League at Columbia Teachers College. So just really diverse, and I'm so thrilled to be here back in the AUC, close to home, as I call it, at Morehouse School of Medicine, where I've been, as I said, for 6 years, and just loving the HBCU life and soaking that up.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
So we're going to talk about today restorative justice in meetings at HBCUs, restorative justice in meetings at HBCUs. And I love your title. I love the work that you do. And full disclosure to everyone, you are a Propel HBCU faculty fellow, and that's how we met. And I just love the fact that we're able to share resources and information.
Absolutely.
Would you say your title again? Because it's a great title.
Well, I'm calling the Director for Operational Excellence and Belonging.
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's talk about restorative justice in meetings.
Sure. So yeah, the title is quirky, but it does speak to the work that's happening here. So restorative justice is essentially an approach to community repair, building, and rebuilding. And I do want to make sure that we have a good foundation. So it's defined by David Karp, who is the co-PI of the National Center for Restorative Justice, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a collaborative decision-making process that includes victims, offenders, and others seeking to hold offenders accountable by having them A, accept and acknowledge responsibility for their offenses, B, to the best of their ability, repair the harm they cause to victims and communities, and C, work to reduce the risk of a reoffense by building a positive social ties within that community. So this is a practice that has been in place since the 70s. It originates in indigenous culture and has been used in criminal justice and education as we're using it now. And it's been introduced here at Morehouse School of Medicine as a way to foster community building as we move forward with our new strategic plan.
Okay, so we're talking about victims and offenders in meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how do we identify this? Tell me a little bit more about how that happens in a meeting.
Okay, so for example, we are at work 8 hours of the day at least. We are in close quarters. We work very closely and passionately, if I might say, towards our mission. And sometimes things may go awry. People's intent may be one way, it might be received another. So using my department as an example, there are times when we have to say, time out, we need to recircle, regroup, level set, and identify where we went wrong, where was the offense, how can we repair it, so we can continue to move forward and focus on the mission of our institution and the work that we're trying to do.
Yes, that's why this topic is so important. Focused on the mission of the institution and how we can follow through. Okay, so I see now how it works and why we need it. So how do we identify institutional or organizational champions?
So we were fortunate here that our leader in this department he approaches work from a restorative lens. And I think having that vantage point as well as a level of influence allows for that to happen here. So you need to make sure that you have someone who is identifying and embodying the values that are required to successfully execute a restorative lens. So before we were formally introduced to it, it was pervasive in our culture here within our office. We have a team of about, fluctuates from 8 and 10. And of course, that's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different objectives, a lot of different approaches, and having that leadership in place and having him have a level of influence as an executive leader has been able to, enables us to be able to practice this regularly.
Okay. So since you practice it in your office regularly, give us an example of how it works.
So, and I apologize for all these alerts. So we begin in restorative justice with a circle. So in opening circle, you are allowing for, there's a limited bias, openness, you have the ability to share or not share. You are telling your truth essentially about what's happening in the moment. So there's a heavy level of mindfulness applied to it. We are able to hold space for others when they're struggling with something. And I think that's always resonating in the back of our minds when we're approaching complex topics. And we are just operating in a place of inclusion that folks may not arrive at the same thing at the same time, but having a restorative lens allows for that space and time for folks to engage in the way that's most comfortable for them.
And so what's the feedback that you've gotten since starting with the restorative justice practice?
It's mixed because we started in our immediate office and it's slowly expanding to other offices. And when things are great, they're great. But when things are challenging, sometimes people feel the need to shut down and shut out. And you know what? There's room for all of that with a restorative lens. If you feel that you need to take a time out and not say anything, that there's room for that as well. So that's on one side. On the other side, I think people are excited because they feel heard. I think this is particularly important when you're working with folks at different levels in the institution, different levels of experience, the entry level with the senior executive. They all bring something of value to the space. And I think having a restorative framework allows for each voice to be heard in a way that makes sense for that individual.
Okay, so what are some other outcomes that have come from having this type of framework, restorative justice framework, in your meetings?
Well, this is relatively new to our institution and it's new in our strategic plan. So we've started using it, trying to specifically address areas of our mission that need deeper focus. So we have, I guess, monthly meetings where we're able to tap in, take the topic at hand, unpack it, but it's all framed with a restorative focus. So the participants are introduced to the space. We do a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the work and labor that has toiled on our land, the original origins of the land. Right here, we're Muskogee. We acknowledge the forced labor of those that were enslaved ahead of us, just to bring us into the moment of where we are and how we plan to approach the work. We have basically a set of tenets, and we allow all participants to weigh in with, okay, do these tenets work for you for the focus of this meeting? People are allowed to edit and provide additional feedback of how they would like to be acknowledged and structured. And then we move forward from there. And I think because the work that we're doing with trying to analyze components of our mission, I think it allows for breathing room for people to just show up and be authentic with their feedback. And I think we've been able to make great progress in a short amount of time, just having that atmosphere.
Thank you for explaining that, because initially I, excuse me, I thought maybe it could be a complicated process. But, you know, as you and I were talking before the podcast, I was explaining that our president, Dr. Valmich Towner, was talking to the students just as we were about to start the podcast about the history of the college. So I can see how that can be incorporated into our meetings. But tell me a little bit more about the training. What kind of training is required or needed?
Yeah, my second recommendation is to have formal training for it, because it's an art form, to say the least, and there are different components to it that I think are important and best led by professionals. And so we were trained by the National Center on Restorative Justice, specifically their University of San Diego team. And for 2 immersive days, we had representatives from offices that represent the entire institution. So we're talking HR, compliance, general counsel, I think marketing. You know, we want areas that touch all areas of our community. And from that, we were able to understand the components of restorative justice and find out how it resonates for us so that we can bring it back to our respective areas and lead from that way. So that, I mean, there are hundreds of training facilities across the country. I mentioned them because their co-PI has written some really interesting work, and our facilitation leaders were just incredible and dynamic. So I have an affinity for them, but just finding out what works best for your population and what fits for the direction that your institution wants to go in and your community wants to go in, and start from there, just so everyone is clear on the guidelines and the setup for how you want to proceed.
Wow, it sounds like Morehouse School of Medicine is taking this initiative, this restorative justice framework, seriously. You've incorporated it into your strategic plan, and everyone has been included, which I love.
Yes, and it's a work in progress.
Okay, okay. So why is that the case? Why has the school adopted restorative justice?
So we are we're not as mature as Kahoma, but you know, we were founded in 1975, and we know we've been growing every year. We're expanding to something new. Within the last few years, we have partnered with Common Spirit to create the More in Common Alliance, which is Common Spirit and Morehouse School of Medicine. And with that, we'll be expanding our clinical training and residency sites over the course of 10 years. And this is across the nation. And I don't have to tell you that the culture here in Atlanta is very different than the culture maybe in Bakersfield, maybe even in Arkansas. And we want to make sure that we have a foundation that is able to be translated to help serve the workforce that will be present there, as well as helping to serve the marginalized populations that we attend to. So having this in place will allow us to grow in a structured way and be able to have checks and balances and strategies and remedies to things that are pretty much inevitable.
Okay, we're talking to Dr. Christina Joseph Muhammad, and we're talking about restorative justice, particularly in meetings at HBCUs. So you've talked about some of the outcomes that you've had. What's the ultimate goal of including restorative justice in your meetings?
So the ultimate goal for my portfolio is to promote culturally humble care through culture and humility. Cultural humility comes through self-reflection. Having a restorative lens allows you to be present and allows you to participate authentically, which is what we always want. But at the same time, it allows for us to, I guess, hold each other accountable for the things that we say and we do. So we want everyone to show up as themselves, but we also want to be sure that we're all moving in the right direction, protected. So they're guardrails.
What is your favorite part or piece of this framework?
One of my favorite parts is you can be present and you don't have to perform. And there was someone at our last meeting, they opted to not actively participate, but they were still there. They were holding space and we were holding space for them because something was going on with them. And when they were ready, they were able to share. And they didn't say much the entire meeting, but what they said was so profound that changed the trajectory of the meeting. I would think about what would happen if, we're in meetings, we want to perform, we want to contribute, we want to do all the things, but sometimes your spirit isn't there. And I love that we are able to hold space for folks who need to regroup in the moment and then share when they're ready. So I think that just is really meeting people where they are, which is always important to me.
So why restorative justice at HBCUs now?
HBCUs, I mean, what we do is so important. I think what's part of our appeal is our community and our approach and our engagement with our students and the communities that we serve. And I think that now with our current climate, we need to have the ability to reach different cultures and different frames of thought actively and purposefully. And I think it's an important tool to use amongst our colleagues at staff and faculty level, as well as encouraging our students to be able to understand their role in how we engage with one another.
The framework is different. So, and I want to go back to the terms, offender and victim.
Mm-hmm.
When explaining that, how does that come across? How does it go when you're talking about offender and victim in meetings?
Well, it depends on the context. So if you're thinking about student conduct, I think it's pretty clear that you have an offense and you have someone who committed the offense and you're working together. When it comes to, let's say, administrative meetings, faculty meetings, there are occurrences that happen and someone walks away feeling not right. And I'll use our team example. Something happens, something is said, someone walks away and is not right and continues. That person that is not feeling heard is, I guess, for lack of a better term, the victim. And the one who created the offense is the offender. And 9 times out of 10 in our space, we don't even know that we're being the offender, but you're called out on it in a safe space and you're able to recognize what you've done, explain your lived reality, and work together to move forward, if that is what is the will of the room. And it's caused us to, especially in a leadership space, when you're leading those in different ways. You may not be a senior leader, but you're leading those who are your direct reports. You don't realize that the things that you say have weight and have gravity and affect the daily outcomes of the things that they do just because of your position. And I've seen with my own eyes how it's caused our mid-level directors to really, I guess, check in with themselves and be mindful of how they say things and what they do. Even though whatever the intention was, you're now more aware of how your delivery could be affecting others. And I think it's made us have a tremendous amount of growth just within our insular team.
Okay, so you speak of a tremendous amount of growth, which leads me to believe that has spilled over into your student body. And you mentioned that your students will be going out nationally. So how do you expect for this framework to impact the student body?
So I love this question because we are at the precipice of defining that right now. So essentially, ideally, we'd like for this to be part of the culture is part of our toolbox of something that we're able to pull from and execute regardless of where we are. If you see Morehouse School of Medicine, you're able to lean into this process. What we are encouraging the respective areas of our institution to do is to define for your area what that means. So if you're in, I don't know, physiology, the physiology team, you need to define how you want that to execute for your particular area, versus HR, versus general counsel, versus admissions. Everyone has their own unique culture, but the foundation will remain the same, but how you execute it needs to be tailored to your respective population. And I think that would resonate the same way for our extension sites.
So Dr. Muhammad, what would you like to leave us with today?
I would like to leave you with, I guess, start small. And again, going back to get that formal training and start where you are. We are all, people push back on this, but I think everyone can lead from their own respective spaces, whether you're a senior executive or you're entry level, there's something you are leading if you are, especially if you're receiving a check to show up someplace every day. So look at your atmosphere, look at your community, your sphere of influence, and start there. And don't be afraid to ask questions and to say, I don't know, if you don't know something, give yourself that grace, but start. Yeah.
So once more, will you tell us about the training, the great training that you experienced?
Right. So we received training through the National Center for Restorative Justice, and the training entailed 2 8-hour days they give you full instructions on how to structure the day. There's this way the room needs to be set up. The timing has to be a certain way, and it's all, positive. But it is something that you have to be mindful of. For example, you have to have a room that's large enough without a table in the middle so that you're all able to sit in a circle and work with each other and see each other. And those 2 intensive, 2.5 days, because we had the last day, which was half day. Just be prepared to roll up your sleeves and be introspective and focus on the why you do things, and just be ready to be emotionally available.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christina Joseph Muhammad, 2324 HBCU, will propel HBCU faculty fellow. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.